I'm Jimmy Aluria here at 3A Automotive and Diesel Repair. We get a lot of questions about diesel engine repairs. So today I'm going to answer some of the most common ones to help you better understand how to keep your diesel running strong and last a long time. What are the most common diesel engine problems that drivers bring their trucks in for? There's several diesel problems that people bring their trucks in for. The main one is when the diesel has a check engine light on. Usually when people try and diagnose something by themselves, when there's a check engine light, that really leads into other problems because diesel parts are very expensive. And if you're just throwing parts into the truck to try and fix the problem, that's going to get really expensive. So usually when people have a check engine light or there's some sort of a running problem where it's not giving you the power that you're used to or it's hesitating, those are really common. The other one that's really common is when somebody's having problems with their DEF system, diesel exhaust fluid. Whenever there's a DEF system problem, that usually requires somebody who has the proper tooling to be able to diagnose what the problem is. So those are the most common ones: running problems, check engine light, or something with the diesel exhaust fluid, the DEF system. So the most common ones are typically when somebody has a check engine light on, there's some sort of a running or a power issue, or there's a problem with the diesel exhaust fluid system. How can someone tell if their diesel engine needs professional repair? When you need professional repairs on your diesels, typically when there's a running problem or there's a check engine light of some sort on, that's usually when you want to go with a professional, somebody who has the proper equipment and the proper training to diagnose what's going on with the diesel. The problem is, the challenge is when you start throwing parts at a diesel, it gets very expensive fast because the parts in these trucks are pretty expensive. So if you don't know specifically what is causing the problem, you might throw 1, 2, 3 parts in it and it still has the same problem because it wasn't properly diagnosed. So it's usually good when you have a running problem or a check engine light to get a professional that has the proper equipment and the proper training to be able to diagnose that problem. What are the warning signs of an injector or a fuel system issue? Typically problems with your injectors or the fuel system is going to start with some kind of a long crank when you're trying to start the vehicle, or a misfire, it's not running properly, or you run into power problems where you get a little bit of a hesitation, you put your foot on the gas and you're getting a power hesitation. Those are some of the first issues you're going to see. Other warning signs might be black smoke because it's dumping too much fuel into the system and it's causing black smoke to come out the tailpipe. Another common issue is when you have too frequent diesel particulate filter regeneration. That's a lot. It's a DPF, diesel particulate filter regeneration. So it's trying to regenerate too often, and that's because there's too much fuel being sent into the system. It's clogging up that filter and it wants to regenerate all the time. So some of the most common ones are a long crank at the startup. You have a misfire, meaning it's just not running properly. Or you have a power hesitation when you're going to take off or you're putting your foot into the gas and you're getting a little hesitation. Those are some of the first things. Then you might see some black smoke coming out the tailpipe because you're getting too much fuel into the system from the injectors, or your diesel particulate filter is trying to regenerate too often. That's because there's an injector issue or a fuel system issue. It's throwing too much fuel in there and it's causing that filter to want to regenerate and clean out too often. Why does a diesel engine start blowing black smoke, and when should you worry? Diesel engines typically blow black smoke when they are on a heavy acceleration, meaning your foot's in the gas because you want to pass somebody or you want to go faster, or you're carrying a heavy load up a hill and you've really got your foot into the gas. That is totally common. You're putting a lot of fuel into the engine and black smoke's coming out the tailpipe. That can be caused when it doesn't go away after acceleration, or it's always blowing black smoke because you've got a problem with the injectors or the fuel system putting too much fuel in, or it's not getting enough air into the engine. And that can be caused by something as simple as a bad air filter. Cleaning up that air filter, replacing the air filter, getting clean air and enough air into the system, the black smoke should go away. You should be worried about this when it doesn't go away. If you're not into the gas and it's blowing black smoke, it's just a normal operation that it's always blowing black smoke, that'll tell you that you typically want to have a professional look at it because that's a more deeper problem. What causes a diesel engine to overheat, especially in Arizona's hot climate? One of the most common things that causes a diesel engine to overheat is typically there's not enough airflow going through the cooling system. In a diesel, you've got the radiator up front of the engine, and a lot of these trucks are on the road and they collect bugs and debris in front of the radiator, so it's blocking that airflow from going through the radiator, which then cools the coolant and cools the engine. So that's something real simple that you can fix. Other things that can cause it are that the cooling system hasn't been flushed out often enough, meaning that you've got coolant that's getting gelled up inside the radiator and it's not properly cooling that engine because there's not a proper flow. The other thing that can cause the problem with the cooling cooling system is a bad fan clutch. The fan clutch is actually, it's the fan on the front of the motor that is actually not spinning at the same speed as the engine. If it did, it wouldn't pull enough air through the system because it needs to be turning at a certain speed. Well, that clutch regulates how fast that fan is spinning on the front of the engine. So if the fan clutch goes bad, it means that it's not spinning fast enough because it's too loose and it's not pulling enough air through the radiator. The most common ones are something's blocking the front of the radiator, bugs, debris, things like that get clogged up in there, or you've got a problem with your fan clutch. Those go out every, so many miles. Another real common one is the fact that the engine coolant is low. Now that could be because it was recently changed and there was an air pocket in the system, and then once it filtered through, it sucked that coolant back into the engine and it needs to be refilled. Or there's some sort of a coolant leak that maybe just over time it was very slow and now it's gotten to a point where it needs a few gallons of coolant and it's overheating because it doesn't have enough coolant in the radiator and the cooling system. How often should you change the oil in a diesel engine to avoid major repairs? How often you should change your oil in a diesel engine depends on what type of driving and what type of work the diesel does. Typically, we recommend between 5,000 and 7,000 miles, even though the manufacturer may say that you can go up to 10,000 miles. The problem with diesel engines is typically they're used as work trucks and they idle a lot, or they're using the diesel engine for power to run like a boom or something on the truck. If that engine is running, it's not ticking miles in the truck, it's actually idling, or even at a higher RPM when it's using the power takeoff on the transmission to actually use, to power up some sort of equipment. It's not miles, but it's time. If you stick with every 5,000 miles, that's usually going to protect you for those extra hours that it's sitting with the air conditioning on or the heater is on a job site while somebody's doing paperwork, or when it's actually performing some work like the boom truck raising and lowering the boom is being powered by the diesel engine. So we typically say between every 5,000 and 7,000 miles if you really want to get that diesel engine to last 300,000 or 400,000 miles. What happens if you skip regular fuel and air filter replacements on a diesel? If you skip regular maintenance for your air filter and your fuel filter, one of the first things that you're going to see is lack of power and acceleration in your diesel. Why? Well, if you have air restriction because you have a dirty air filter, it's not putting enough air into that system and it's not going to burn efficiently. On the other side, if your fuel filters are dirty, it's going to put a lot more pressure on that fuel pump to push fuel into those injectors because of debris, water, rust, things that can get into those injectors that will cause performance issues and will also cause the premature failure of the fuel injectors. By not replacing the fuel filters in a timely manner, you can cause premature damage to your fuel injectors from rust, water, and any debris that's actually in the tank that came from the pump. Not only will that debris cause poor running conditions, it also puts excess pressure on your fuel pump. And that can be very expensive just because you're not maintaining the fuel filters in a timely manner. Why is preventative maintenance so important for diesel engines? Preventative maintenance is really important on a diesel engine because they're so expensive. These are high performance mechanical engines. They will perform for a long time, they will give you lots of horsepower, and they will do their job, but they need to be taken care of. If you don't take care of these things over a long period of time, you're only going to get 150 or 200,000 miles out of these diesel engines, and they cost $30,000 to $40,000 to replace. But if you do the regular maintenance on them, you can get 300,000 to 500,000 miles out of these things, even in a commercial application like a work truck or a boom truck or delivery vehicle. What should truck owners know about maintaining the diesel's coolant system? What you should know about maintaining your diesel's coolant system is that it doesn't just affect the engine. The cooling system also cools the transmission, and it has everything to do with how cold your AC is blowing. So you want to maintain that cooling system, not only just to keep the engine cool and operating at its proper temperature, but also it's keeping that transmission at the proper operating temperature, and it's going to affect how cold your AC is blowing. Not only does the antifreeze or engine coolant protect the inside of the engine and the radiator, it also allows that fluid, the antifreeze, to absorb the maximum amount of heat without boiling over so that it can keep that engine cool. If the engine coolant is too old or it doesn't have the proper mixture, it will boil too fast and it won't allow that engine to cool off. By properly maintaining the engine coolant fluid and changing that out every 30,000 miles or so, you're going to have fresh coolant in there that's going to be able to cool off that engine and keep the inside of that engine contaminant free. How can you tell if the glow plugs or the batteries are the reason your diesel won't start? You'll know it's a battery issue if you're trying to start your diesel and it's just not cranking over fast enough. You've got to have a lot of RPMs to be able to start a diesel. So if it's cranking over real slow or not at all, typically that could be a battery issue. If it's cranking over really fast and it's not starting and it's cool out or cold out, that could be a glow plug issue. We've got enough RPMs and we're just cranking and cranking and cranking and cranking and it's not starting. It's because that engine block isn't getting heated up enough from the glow plugs to actually ignite that diesel fuel. It needs to be warm. So that could be where you have a glow plug problem and not a battery problem. Another way to tell that is if the truck was starting just fine when it was warm out, and now that it's cool out, it's not starting, that's typically a red flag that you have a glow plug problem or something with the glow plug system that's not heating that up enough so it won't start. But if it was starting fine when it was warm out, that's a pretty telltale sign that you've got a glow plug problem. What are the most costly diesel repair mistakes drivers make, and how can they be avoided? The most costly thing that you can do to your diesel is throw parts at a problem rather than getting it properly tested by a professional. We've seen this many, many times where people will go to the internet or they'll buy one of those cheap scanners that they can buy on Amazon and it tells them to replace this part. So they go to the dealer or they go to a part supplier and they buy the part, put it in, and it doesn't work. That can get very expensive very fast because diesel parts are very expensive. Another one of the more costly repairs is when somebody runs gas through their diesel. The solution to that is when you go to the gas pump, slow down. People get in a hurry. They're on their phone, they're dealing with all kinds of stuff that's going on in the day, and they grab regular gas and they put it into the diesel tank. It won't run. It'll run for a second. As soon as that diesel that's in the line gets passed, it is going to start picking up the gasoline and it'll shut off. Usually it doesn't do a lot of damage. If it sits too long, it can, but typically the tank needs to be drained and you need to put fresh diesel in the system. So the solution is when you go to the gas pump, slow down, make sure that whatever you're putting in there usually has a green handle on it, and then you won't have that problem. One of the most expensive things and mistakes that people make is when they put the diesel exhaust fluid into the fuel. It's more common than you would think it is, so you gotta slow down before you put that fluid into the system. You have to add DEF fluid typically every few tanks of gas. If that fluid gets poured into the diesel, it just crystallizes. To make matters worse, if you turn that key on and the fuel pump pumps that fuel up into the injectors, you might have to replace everything from the tank up to the fuel injectors to actually get it fixed. Sometimes if you've stopped before you've turned on the truck, all you have to do is change the filter out and clean out the system from the tank up to the filter. And those can get very expensive. So the number one rule is if you make that mistake and you put DEF fluid into your gas tank, stop, take the key out of the system and don't do anything. Problem is some of the modern diesels, as soon as you open the driver's door, it's turning on the fuel pump and it will pump it at least up into the fuel filter. So the number one rule, when you're using the DEF and you're gonna replace the DEF fluid, do not put it into the diesel fuel tank. It has its own reservoir that you need to put that in, so slow down and make sure you know exactly where you're putting the DEF fluid. How can regular servicing at a certified diesel shop extend engine life beyond 300,000 miles? By having a professional regularly service your diesel, you're gonna have professional eyes look at that thing every 3 or 4 months, making sure that all the service intervals are done at the proper mileage and that anything that could be a red flag that could cause future problems is being addressed right away. I hope this video helped answer some of your questions about diesel engine repairs. If you'd like to schedule an appointment for a diagnostic test or you want to talk with one of our certified diesel technicians, give us a call here at 3A Automotive and Diesel at 602-997-7978, or you can just drop by and we'd love to talk to you and see what you got.